Welcome to the U.S. History Staar Cram Session. I would like to start by letting you know that the entire U.S. History Department at Mesquite High School believes in you. You can do it. This review will be broken down by major eras in U.S. history. The first era we will examine is westward expansion. During this time period, the attitude of the American government was one of manifest destiny. America was destined by God to expand from East Coast to West Coast. Completion of the Transcontinental Railroad contributed to America fulfilling this destiny. The Homestead Act was passed to encourage settlers to move west and stake their claim. The Native Americans that were displaced by all this movement were either put on reservations or killed. Those that survived were assimilated so they would fit in better in American society. The Gilded Age saw a time in which the government was practically run by the wealthy industrialists. This laissez-faire government did whatever was good for business. The industrialists, Carnegie with the steel industry and Rockefeller with the oil industry, formed monopolies. This meant they had complete control over an entire industry. Monopolies are bad because they eliminate competition, which is how prices are held down in a free market system. A trust is when small companies join together to form one large company. Political machines were organizations that gave out jobs and places to live in exchange for votes. Labor unions formed in response to the horrible working conditions and wages during this time period. Muckrakers were journalists who exposed corruptions. Initiative, referendum, and recall were all measures that gave people more power in how their government operated. When thinking of the progressive amendments, remember this: the 16th Amendment. The first age you are allowed to work is 16 years old. This is when you start paying income tax. 17th Amendment. The first two letters in the word 17 are S-E, and the first two letters in the senator are S-E. This is when we were able to directly elect our senators. 18th Amendment. You cannot drink when you are 18, but you can when you are 21. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. 19th Amendment. This gave women the right to vote. The United States greatly increased their territory during the imperialism period. The U.S. entered into the Spanish-American War in 1898 due to primarily yellow journalism. This is a sensational form of news reporting that is loosely based on facts. The Dulum letter was written by a Spanish diplomat. It was critical of President McKinley. It was also published in the newspapers. The USS Maine exploded off the coast of Cuba. The newspapers blamed Spain. After defeating Spain, the U.S. acquired the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Following the war, the U.S. emerged as a world power. President Theodore Roosevelt became famous when he formed the Rough Riders, a voluntary cavalry unit which fought in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. The Roosevelt Corollary declared that the U.S. would act as an international police power in Latin America. President Roosevelt also oversaw the completion of the Panama Canal. The open door policy ensured that the U.S. would trade with China. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated, which started World War I. Militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism are all long-term contributing causes to the war. The U.S. entered the war after German U-boats continually sunk U.S. merchant ships in the Atlantic. Woodrow Wilson was the president during World War I. He was re-elected in 1916 on the campaign promise of keeping the U.S. out of the war in Europe that had been raging for 2 years. When the U.S. entered the war in 1917, he claimed it was to make the world safe for democracy. His 14 points were a proposal for peace following the war. He called for a League of Nations that would act as a world peacekeeping force. The United States did not join the League, as fears of being entangled in wars in Europe again. The Treaty of Versailles ended World War I and blamed Germany for causing the war. The Roaring Twenties. The Red Scare occurred when Americans feared communism might spread in the United States. Prohibition outlawed alcohol, which gave rise to the illegal bootlegging trade in gangsters. The Great Migration saw a massive movement of African Americans from the South to the North and the Midwest in search of jobs to flee the racist Jim Crow laws. The Harlem Renaissance was a period of African American cultural creativity in music, art, and literature. Flappers were the rebellious women of the time period that wore short dresses, drank alcohol, and smoked. The Great Depression. Following the stock market crash in 1929, the U.S. fell into a period known as the Great Depression. At the same time, the American farmer was suffering through one of the worst droughts in history, where a huge area of farmland was lost. FDR's New Deal was his effort to pull the country out of the Great Depression. He created jobs programs, regulatory agencies, and entitlement programs such as Social Security. He greatly expanded the role of government in people's everyday life. World War II. The harsh treatment of Germany in the Treaty of Versailles was a major contributor to the cause of World War II. This time period saw extremist dictators rise to power due to global depression. Hitler's invasion of Poland forced the world into another world war. The U.S. once again attempted to remain neutral. Japan changed that when they attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The war ended in 1945 after Germany was defeated and the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. D-Day saw the Allies launch into the European campaign at Normandy, France, on June 6, 1945. The Holocaust was the systematic mass murder of over 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime. Rationing meant conserving all resources to better support the war effort. Japanese Americans were moved inland from the coast of California to internment camps in order to overcome any Japanese spy efforts. Propaganda was used to get Americans to support the war effort. The GI Bill gave military veterans financial and education benefits. Suburbs are the areas on the outskirts of major cities. The baby boom is the period from the end of World War II to the mid-1960s that saw an unusual high birth rate. The Interstate Highway Act authorized the building of a national highway system. The Cold War. The Cold War was a period of political and military tension between the USA and Soviet Union. Containment becomes the policy of the U.S. adopted following World War II, in which it vowed to prevent the spread of communism. The Truman Doctrine gave military and economic aid to countries that were threatened by communism. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild Europe following World War II to ensure those countries did not fall to the Soviets. The United Nations was an international peacekeeping body formed after World War II. Second Red Scare followed World War II. Senator Joseph McCarthy raised fears of communism spreading within the government. The Soviets launched Sputnik, which was the first man-made satellite. This sparked the space race, and the U.S. responded by creating NASA. The domino theory suggested that if the U.S. let one country fall to communism, others would follow. This was the thinking in the U.S. engaging in the Vietnam War. Following the war in Vietnam, The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was passed that limited the president's right to send troops into battle without congressional approval. Brown v. Board of Education made it unconstitutional to segregate public schools based on race. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 made discrimination based on race, religion, or national origin in public places illegal. Watergate scandal led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. The public lost faith in the federal government following the scandal. Jimmy Carter's presidency was marred by high inflation and the Iran hostage crisis, in which American embassy in Tehran was overrun by revolutionaries. Ronald Reagan's presidency was noted for his hardline stance against communism. George H.W. Bush's presidency was noted for the Persian Gulf War, in which Iraq invaded Kuwait. The U.S. defeated Saddam Hussein's forces and liberated Kuwait. Bill Clinton's presidency was marred by the Monica Lewinsky scandal. The George W. Bush presidency was defined by the terrorist attacks on 9/11 by the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. The War on Terror saw the U.S. engage in two wars, one in Afghanistan and one in Iraq. Barack Obama made history by being the first African American president. His major accomplishments has been the passage of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Strategies for the test. Be confident. Attitude is everything. Carefully read the instructions. As you carefully read the question, make sure you underline any key words, terms, or events. Read each answer choice before you choose an answer. Eliminate answers as you read. Actually read the short reading excerpts on the test. If you are unsure on a problem, skip it and return to it later. Look for the best correct answer. Do not assume that the first answer that is associated with the question is correct. Brainstorm before you look at the answer choices. What do you know about the topic that the question is addressing? Once you have completed the test, go back and answer the problems you skipped. Make sure you eliminate obvious wrong answers. Do not change any answers unless you are positive you are wrong. Your first instinct is usually correct. Trust yourself. When in doubt, if you are not able to eliminate answer choices, pick C. This is a last resort. And once again, we have faith in you. We know you can do it. Take your time, take deep breaths, and we know you'll be successful. Good luck.